Hello and welcome to Night Train to Mondo, Cine. I'm Dave Wilt, and this episode is the third part of our series on Spanish Dracula Carlos Villarías. From 1930 to 1941, Carlos Villarías appeared in 59 feature films. 6 of these were made in Mexico and 53 were shot in Hollywood. Of the Hollywood films, 38 were Spanish language productions and the other 15 were made in English. This episode will focus on the latter 15 movies. As discussed in the previous episode of Night Train to Mondo Cine, Carlos Villarías began his Hollywood career in 1930, appearing in 38 Spanish language features through 1939. Due to his ability to speak English, when Spanish language film production began to dwindle in 1931, Villarías was able to pick up roles in English language films. He made his English language debut in a Buck Jones Western, The California Trail, which went into production in November 1931 at the Iverson Ranch in Chatsworth, California. Billed as Carlos Villar on the credits, he has a substantial supporting role in California Trail. The film is set in 1838 before California became part of the USA and deals with a scheme by a small town's Mexican mayor and military commander who are extorting the local population in an attempt to have them vacate their land. Buck Jones arrives with supplies for the starving inhabitants and becomes a Robin Hood-like outlaw. Villarías appears in the second half of the film as the governor of the region, traveling incognito, and joins Buck in his battle against the corrupt administration. He has an active role riding and shooting and has a good rapport with Jones. This is, ironically, both his first and his best role in a Hollywood English language movie. Laughing at Life was the second English language sound feature for Carlos Villarías. It was shot sometime in early 1933 and released in July. Victor McLaglen stars as a roaming soldier of fortune in a fictional Latin American country who's hired to import guns for a looming revolution. An unbilled Carlos Villarías was joined by several other future Mexican cinema notables. Emilio Fernandez has a dual role as a uniformed soldier and a would-be rebel, and Eduardo Rosamena plays a priest for a few seconds. Rosamena, who had appeared previously with Carlos Villarías in Dracula, worked in Spanish language cinema and on the stage in California in the early 1930s, before returning to Mexico and a long cinematic acting career. Villarías is one of a group of plotters scheming to oust the country's president. When the revolution breaks out, he's dressed in a quasi-military uniform and does a bit of running around with the other conspirators. Press reports claim Carlos Villarías, along with Martín Garalaga, Lucio Vegas, and Jose Crespo, were to appear in MGM's Viva Villa, shot from late 1933 into early 1934. But none of these actors worked on the picture, or at least none were included in the final print. Villarías made 2 English language film appearances in 1934. An Old Spanish Onion was a musical two-reeler starring singer Ruth Etting, released through RKO. The film is set in Spanish California in 1842, a familiar location for Villarías in his Hollywood pictures. Apparently, he plays somebody's father, although this film has so far proved impossible to view. Border Town was the first big Hollywood film in English for Carlos Villarías. It went into production in August 1934 at the Warner Brothers studio. Two of the three major Latin roles went to white actors, Paul Muni, born in what is now Ukraine, and New York native Robert Barat, with Spanish-born Soledad Jimenez taking the part of the mother of Johnny Ramirez. Carlos Villarías has a very small role, unbilled, around the 15-minute mark, as Carlos, the head waiter of a Los Angeles restaurant. He has only a few lines and is only seen in long shot or in profile, but he probably appreciated the paycheck. His only English-language film role in 1935 was again unbilled in Going to Town, a Paramount release starring Mae West. According to an article in the magazine Cine Mundial, a deleted scene included Villarías playing a butler leading a racehorse up to Mae West's bedroom. This probably occurred in the Buenos Aires sequence of the picture, and Villarías cannot otherwise be glimpsed in the 70-minute version of the film that is currently available. Carlos Villarías left the USA for Mexico in May 1935 and didn't return until March 1937, a period to be covered in our next episode. 1938 turned out to be a very productive year for him. He made 7 Hollywood films in English and 4 in Spanish. Tropic Holiday was the first of 2 films Villarías made this year at the Paramount Studios. It went into production in mid-January and wrapped in late March. It stars some second-tier Paramount actors, including Bob Burns, Martha Raye, Dorothy Lamour, and Ray Milland. Tito Guizar also appears. He and Carlos Villarías would work together in a number of Spanish-language pictures released through Paramount in 1938 and 1939. Villarías, again unbilled, appears in the climactic bullfight scene as the uniformed commandante of the Mexican town where the film takes place. He has little or no dialogue, but gets a fair number of cutaway reaction shots as the comedic action takes place. Rose of the Rio Grande, shot in February 1938, is set in Mexico in the 1830s and stars John Carroll and Mexican actress Movita, with Antonio Moreno as the villain. Carlos Villarías was uncredited, but can be seen in stills playing a priest. He went back to Paramount for Paris Honeymoon, shot from the end of May until late July. This musical comedy starred Bing Crosby, Francisca Gall, and Shirley Ross. Despite the title, the film mostly takes place in a fictional Balkan country. Villarías has an unbilled role, a rare example of him being cast as a non-Latin character in a Hollywood English-language movie. He appears in a scene in which Gall is elected the Rose Queen. Unfortunately, this is another Carlos Villarías role which can't be viewed today, as currently available prints have been cut by about 9 minutes. By the third week in July, Villarías was making a Tex Ritter Western, Starlight Over Texas, filmed at Corriganville, California. He appears in just 2 scenes, wears the same costume in both, and has only a few lines of dialogue in the second scene and none in the first. His total screen time is less than 2 minutes. These scenes were most likely shot in one day. Ritter's leading lady was the Mexican-born Carmen LaRue, who'd previously appeared in a supporting role with Villarías in the California Trail. Then it was back to the big leagues for Flirting with Fate, a Joe E. Brown comedy produced by David Lowe for MGM release. This was shot between August and October 1938. Flirting with Fate claims to take place in Paraguay, which looks suspiciously like the American West and is plagued by bandits led by Leo Carrillo, who mostly look like movie Mexicans, but sometimes wear gaucho outfits. Joe E. Brown is the leader of a stage troupe stranded there. Villarías shows up in the last 10 minutes as the chief of police. He has one good line. Racing to save Brown, his friends ask Villarías why he doesn't drive faster. This is a 20-mile zone, he says. California Frontier reunited Buck Jones and Carlos Villarías 7 years after they had appeared together in California Trail, although they share no scenes in the second movie. In the opening scene of California Frontier, wealthy landowner Don Pedro Cantova, played by Villarías, whose last name is misspelled on the credits as Villarías, is having dinner with his family when a group of Anglo outlaws ride their horses into the dining room, pistol whip Don Pedro, and then shoot him to death in front of his wife, daughter, and sons. Buck Jones is a U.S. military officer sent to investigate stories of such atrocities, which are dispossessing Mexicans of their land and claiming their property for crooked U.S. land agents. Carlos Villarías wrapped up his 1938 English-language film chores at the end of October and the beginning of November with one more Western, Frontiers of 49, originally titled California Cavalcade. This was a Larry Darmore production for Columbia release. The story of this film was remarkably similar to that of California Frontier, with Mexicans being unfairly ejected from their homes in California. Villarías is credited as Padre, possibly another Spanish priest. The film starred Bill Elliott. His leading lady was Luana Alcañiz, who'd worked with Villarías in 4 Spanish-language features in 1930-31, and had also appeared with him in Verbena Trágica, shot in May and June 1938. Carlos Villarías' 1939 English-language screen work began in mid-June with Tropic Fury, a Universal B-picture starring Richard Arlen and Andy Devine. Villarías, again uncredited, was reunited with his Dracula co-star Lupita Tovar, although they share only one scene, the very last one in the movie. Villarías plays a government official of whatever fictitious South American country the film is set in. Tovar has the second female lead and is paired romantically at the end with comic relief Andy Devine. The film mostly takes place on a rubber plantation run by a Napoleon-loving despot. The second Carlos Villarías picture that year was shot in September. It was a B-level musical starring juvenile singer Bobby Breen and romantic leads Kent Taylor and Marla Shelton, produced by Saul Lesser for RKO Radio release. Escape to Paradise is set in the fictitious South American country of Rosarita, where people drink mate and sometimes dress like gauchos, but it's not necessarily Argentina. Carlos Villarías appears in 2 scenes as a mate farmer and has little dialogue, but at least he gets billing in the end credits. Villarías was living at 101 South Bunker Hill Avenue in Los Angeles at this time, and according to the 1940 census, had made $900 in 1939. This doesn't seem like a lot for acting in 7 feature films, 5 in Spanish and 2 in English, but his apartment rent may have been as low as $10 a month. The only English-language film work in 1940 for Carlos Villarías began in August at Universal, almost exactly 10 years after he'd starred there as Dracula. Villarías had a small role in the comedy mystery Meet the Wildcat, starring Ralph Bellamy and Margaret Lindsay, in what appears to be a dry run for their subsequent Ellery Queen series. Villarías shows up in 3 scenes in Meet the Wildcat, although unfortunately his face is only clearly visible in one, and he's wearing a gigantic handlebar mustache. He plays Carlos, a Mexico City police detective, and has only a couple of lines of dialogue. Finally, in 1941, Villarías made his Hollywood swan song in Hold Back the Dawn, a Paramount drama starring Charles Boyer and Olivia de Havilland. Unlike Going to Town, where he was left on the cutting room floor, Carlos Villarías at least appears in Hold Back the Dawn, but just barely. He plays a Mexican judge who marries Charles Boyer and Olivia de Havilland, but is only on screen for a few seconds, is only shown from behind, and has no dialogue. Carlos Villarías worked in Mexican cinema from summer 1935 until early 1937, and again from 1942 until late 1948. This part of his career will be examined in the next episode of Night Train to Mondo Cine. Thanks for watching and stay tuned.